Everything begins with a reason, but not just any reason. A reason that is deeply personal, emotionally charged, and strong enough to carry you through moments when logic alone would fail you. Most people move through life reacting to circumstances, chasing outcomes, or following routines they never questioned, and that is exactly why they struggle to stay consistent when things get difficult. When your actions are not connected to a deeper purpose, they rely on temporary feelings, and feelings are unpredictable. Some days you feel driven, other days you feel tired, distracted, or overwhelmed, and in those moments without a clear why, it becomes easy to quit, delay, or settle. But when your actions are anchored in something meaningful, something that truly matters to you, your behavior begins to change in a powerful way. You stop asking whether you feel like doing something and start reminding yourself why it must be done. That shift is where real mental strength begins to take shape. A strong why creates internal pressure that is far more powerful than external expectations. It doesn't depend on rewards, recognition, or approval from others. It comes from within, and because of that, it stays with you even when no one is watching. It turns discipline into a natural response rather than a forced effort. When you know why you are waking up early, why you are pushing through discomfort, why you are choosing growth over ease, your mind stops negotiating with excuses. Instead of saying, "I'll do it later," you begin to say, "This matters too much to delay." That level of clarity eliminates hesitation and builds momentum. Over time, that momentum compounds, turning small, consistent actions into a powerful identity. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to be better. You begin to see yourself as someone who lives with purpose. And that identity becomes your shield against doubt and distraction. Challenges don't disappear, but your response to them changes completely. Instead of seeing obstacles as reasons to stop, you start seeing them as part of the journey that your purpose demands. Pain becomes more tolerable because it has meaning. Effort becomes more sustainable because it is directed. Even failure takes on a different role, no longer a signal to quit, but feedback to improve. Without a why, failure feels final, but with a why, failure becomes temporary. This is what separates those who remain consistent from those who constantly start over. It's not talent, luck, or even intelligence. It's clarity of purpose. And the truth is, your why doesn't have to be something grand or world-changing. It just has to be real to you. It could be the desire to prove something to yourself, to create a better future, to break a pattern, or to become someone you can respect. What matters is that it resonates deeply enough to move you into action, especially when action feels hardest. When that connection is strong, discipline stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like alignment. You are no longer forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do. You are choosing actions that reflect who you truly want to become. That alignment removes internal conflict and replaces it with focus. And focus, sustained over time, is what builds an unbreakable mind. Because when everything around you becomes uncertain, your why remains constant, guiding your decisions, strengthening your resolve, and pushing you forward even when progress feels slow, invisible, or uncertain. Consistency is quiet, almost invisible at first, and that is exactly why most people underestimate its power. There is something far more appealing about intensity, the burst of energy, the dramatic effort, the feeling of going all in for a short period of time. It feels productive, it feels powerful, and it gives the illusion of rapid progress. But intensity without consistency is fragile. It depends on mood, on motivation, on circumstances lining up just right. The moment life becomes inconvenient or uncomfortable, that intensity fades, and with it, progress disappears. What remains is frustration, the sense of starting over again and again, never quite building anything that lasts. Consistency works differently. It does not rely on excitement or perfect conditions. It shows up in ordinary moments, in the days when you feel nothing, when there is no inspiration pushing you forward. It is built in repetition, in the decision to keep going even when the results are not visible yet. That is the part most people struggle with, the lack of immediate reward. The human mind is wired to seek quick outcomes, to respond to visible progress, and when that doesn't happen, doubt begins to creep in. Questions start forming about whether the effort is even worth it, whether anything is changing at all. This is where consistency becomes a test of character rather than capability. Every small action repeated daily begins to compound in ways that are difficult to notice in the moment, but impossible to ignore over time. A single effort may seem insignificant, almost meaningless on its own, but when that effort is repeated again and again, it starts to build a foundation. That foundation becomes stability, and stability creates strength. Unlike intensity, which spikes and crashes, consistency creates a steady upward movement. It is not dramatic, but it is reliable. And reliability is what builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself when you act consistently. You send a message to your mind that you are someone who follows through. That message matters more than any external result because it shapes your identity. You begin to see yourself as dependable, as disciplined, as someone who does what they say they will do. That identity reduces internal resistance. You no longer debate whether to take action. It becomes part of who you are. The decision is already made, and all that remains is execution. There will be days when your effort feels small, when it feels like it doesn't measure up to what you could do at your peak. Those are the days that matter the most. Because consistency is not about performing at your best, it is about refusing to perform at zero. It is about maintaining momentum, no matter how slow it feels. Momentum, once built, becomes a powerful force. It carries you forward, making each next step slightly easier than the last. Breaking that momentum, on the other hand, makes restarting far more difficult than continuing ever was. Intensity often leads to burnout because it demands too much too quickly. It pushes beyond sustainable limits and creates a cycle of overexertion followed by complete TWQF. Consistency avoids that trap by focusing on what can be maintained over the long term. It respects the process, understanding that real growth is not a single moment of effort, but a series of repeated actions that build upon each other. Over time, the gap between those who rely on intensity and those who commit to consistency becomes clear. One group experiences bursts of progress followed by long periods of stagnation, while the other builds steadily, almost quietly, until their results speak louder than any short-term effort ever could. The difference is not in how hard they work in a single moment, but in how often they show up when it matters the least and feels the hardest. Discomfort is often misunderstood as something to avoid, something that signals danger, failure, or a limit that should not be crossed. From an early age, most people are conditioned to seek ease, to move toward what feels good and away from what feels difficult. That instinct may protect in certain situations, but when it comes to growth, it becomes the very thing that holds people back. Because everything that strengthens the mind lives on the other side of discomfort. Every challenge, every stretch, every moment that demands more than what feels natural is not there to break you, but to train you. The problem is not the presence of discomfort. The problem is the interpretation of it. When discomfort appears, the immediate reaction is resistance. The mind begins to search for escape routes, for excuses, for reasons to delay or avoid. It creates stories that make retreat feel justified. This is where most people lose the opportunity to grow, not because they lack ability, but because they misread the signal. Discomfort is not a warning to stop, it is an invitation to adapt. It is the moment where your current limits are being tested, where your capacity is being expanded. If you step away too quickly, you remain the same. If you lean into it even slightly, you begin to change. Training the mind to embrace discomfort requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking how to avoid it, you start asking what it is trying to teach you. That question alone transforms the experience. The focus moves from pain to purpose, from resistance to curiosity. Each uncomfortable moment becomes a form of feedback, revealing where you are weak, where you hesitate, where fear still has influence. And once you can see those areas clearly, you can begin to work on them deliberately. There is a unique strength that develops when you repeatedly choose discomfort over ease. It is not loud or visible, but it is deeply rooted. You begin to trust yourself in situations that once felt overwhelming. Pressure no longer feels like a threat, it becomes familiar territory. This familiarity reduces fear, and with less fear, your ability to act improves. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start moving in imperfect conditions. That is where real progress is made. Discomfort also builds resilience in a way that comfort never can. When everything is easy, there is no reason to adapt, no reason to grow beyond your current state. But when things become difficult, your mind is forced to find new ways to cope, to adjust, to push through. Each time you do this, you expand your tolerance. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. What once made you hesitate becomes something you can handle with confidence. Over time, this creates a powerful advantage. Situations that stop others no longer stop you, not because they are easier, but because you are stronger. There is also a level of discipline that emerges from embracing discomfort. It is easy to act when something feels good. It is much harder to act when every part of you wants to quit. By choosing to continue in those moments, you strengthen your ability to follow through regardless of how you feel. That ability is rare, and it is what separates those who make consistent progress from those who remain stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. The goal is not to seek discomfort for the sake of suffering, but to recognize it as a necessary part of the process. It is the weight that builds mental muscle, the resistance that creates strength. Without it, growth becomes shallow and temporary. With it, growth becomes deep and lasting. Each time you face discomfort and choose to stay, even for a little longer than before, you are training your mind to handle more, to endure more, to become more, and over time, that training transforms not just what you can do, but who you become. The most powerful force shaping your life is not what happens around you, but what happens within you. Every experience you go through is filtered through a story, a narrative your mind creates to make sense of what is happening. That narrative determines how you feel, how you respond, and ultimately, what actions you take. Two people can face the exact same situation, yet walk away with completely different outcomes. Not because the situation was different, but because the story they told themselves was different. This is where mental strength begins, in the awareness that you are not just a participant in your thoughts, but the author of them. Most people never question the voice in their head. They accept it as truth, even when it is filled with doubt, fear, and limitation. That voice becomes automatic, shaped by past experiences, failures, opinions of others, and moments that left an emotional impact. Over time, it builds a pattern, and that pattern begins to repeat itself without conscious control. When something challenging happens, the mind immediately reaches for a familiar script. It says things like, "This is too hard, you are not ready, you might fail, you have failed before." These thoughts feel real because they are consistent, but consistency does not make them accurate. It only makes them familiar. Taking control of the narrative starts with recognizing that not every thought deserves your belief. Thoughts are suggestions, not commands. They appear, often uninvited, but you have the ability to decide whether they stay or pass. This requires awareness, the ability to pause and observe what is happening internally instead of reacting automatically. In that pause, you create space, and in that space, you gain power. You begin to see the difference between what is happening and what you are telling yourself about what is happening. Once that awareness is developed, the next step is intentional direction. If your mind is already creating a narrative, then it makes sense to guide it rather than leave it to chance. This does not mean ignoring reality or pretending everything is easy. It means choosing a perspective that moves you forward instead of holding you back. When faced with difficulty, instead of telling yourself that you are not capable, you begin to say that you are learning, that you are adapting, that you have handled challenges before and can do so again. This shift may seem small, but its impact is significant. It changes your emotional state, and your emotional state influences your actions. Over time, the narrative you consistently reinforce becomes your default way of thinking. The mind adapts to repetition. Just as negative self-talk can become automatic, so can constructive and empowering thoughts. The key difference is that this time the pattern is built intentionally. You are no longer reacting to old scripts. You are creating new ones that align with the person you want to become. This alignment reduces internal conflict. Instead of battling your own thoughts, you begin to work with them. There will still be moments when doubt appears, when the old narrative tries to return. That is part of the process. Control does not mean elimination, it means management. It means recognizing those thoughts quickly and choosing not to engage with them. It means redirecting your focus back to a narrative that supports your growth. Each time you do this, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. Your actions will always follow the story you believe. If the narrative in your mind is filled with limitation, your behavior will reflect hesitation. If the narrative is built on possibility, resilience, and growth, your behavior will reflect confidence and persistence. This is why controlling the narrative is not just about thinking differently, it is about living differently. It shapes how you approach challenges, how you respond to setbacks, and how you move forward when things do not go as planned. When you take ownership of your internal dialogue, you remove one of the biggest obstacles to progress. You stop being held back by invisible barriers created by your own mind. Instead, you begin to create a mental environment that supports action, encourages resilience, and sustains focus. And in that environment, growth is no longer something you hope for, it becomes something you build deliberately, thought by thought, decision by decision, until the way you think consistently supports the way you want to live. Motivation is often treated as the starting point of action, the spark that gets things moving, the feeling people wait for before they begin. It feels powerful in the moment, creating a surge of energy and clarity that makes everything seem possible. But the problem with motivation is not that it exists, it is that it is unreliable. It rises and falls without warning, influenced by mood, environment, and circumstances that are constantly changing. When people depend on motivation, they unknowingly tie their progress to something they cannot control. On the days when motivation is high, they perform well, they push forward, they feel productive. On the days when it disappears, they hesitate, delay, or stop entirely. This inconsistency is what keeps most people stuck in cycles of starting strong and fading quickly. Discipline operates on a completely different level. It is not driven by emotion, and it does not require excitement to function. It is a decision, repeated consistently, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Where motivation asks if you are ready, discipline responds that readiness is not required. This shift removes the need to negotiate with yourself every time action is required. Instead of waiting for the right feeling, you rely on a system of behavior that you follow no matter what. That system becomes your structure, and structure creates stability. At first, discipline feels difficult because it goes against natural tendencies. The mind prefers ease, comfort, and immediate reward. Discipline demands effort, patience, and delayed gratification. It asks you to act even when there is no visible outcome, even when progress feels slow or uncertain. This is where most people struggle because they are conditioned to expect quick results. When those results do not appear, doubt begins to grow, and without discipline, that doubt leads to inaction. But when discipline is present, action continues despite the doubt. And that continuation is what eventually produces results. There is a quiet strength in discipline that is often overlooked. It does not announce itself, and it does not seek recognition. It shows up in small, consistent actions that seem insignificant in isolation but become powerful over time. Each time you follow through on something you said you would do, you reinforce a sense of trust within yourself. That trust is critical because it shapes how you see your own capabilities. You begin to view yourself as someone who follows through, someone who does not rely on excuses, someone who can be counted on. This identity is far more valuable than any short burst of motivation because it is stable and enduring. Discipline also reduces the mental energy required to make decisions. When your actions are based on habits and commitments rather than feelings, you eliminate the constant internal debate. You no longer ask whether you should act. You simply act because it is what you do. This clarity frees up mental space, allowing you to focus on execution rather than hesitation. Over time, what once required effort becomes automatic. The resistance fades, not because the task becomes easier, but because your relationship with it changes. There will be moments when motivation returns, and in those moments it can amplify your efforts. But the difference is that you are no longer dependent on it. It becomes a bonus rather than a necessity. Your progress is no longer tied to temporary emotional states, but to a consistent pattern of behavior that continues regardless of circumstances. This is what creates long-term growth. It is not built on occasional bursts of energy, but on sustained effort that does not break under pressure. The real power of discipline is revealed over time. While others are waiting for the right moment, you are already moving. While others are starting and stopping, you are continuing. This consistency creates a gap that widens with each passing day, not because you are doing something extraordinary in a single moment, but because you are doing something ordinary repeatedly without fail. And in that repetition, discipline transforms from something you practice into something you embody, shaping your actions, your mindset, and ultimately the results you create in a way that no temporary feeling ever could progress. Is not built on effort alone, it is built on awareness. Most people move through their days in a constant cycle of action without ever stopping to examine what those actions are producing. They stay busy, they stay occupied, but they do not necessarily move forward. Without reflection, effort becomes repetition without direction, and repetition without direction leads to stagnation. This is why the ability to pause, to step back, and to honestly evaluate your own behavior is one of the most powerful habits you can develop. It turns experience into insight, and insight into improvement. Reflection begins with honesty. Not the kind that is harsh or self-critical, but the kind that is clear and objective. It requires you to look at your day without excuses, without exaggeration, without distortion. What did you do well? Where did you fall short? How did you respond under pressure? Where did you allow distraction to take control? These questions are not meant to create guilt, they are meant to create clarity. Because without clarity, there is no way to improve. If you cannot see your patterns, you cannot change them. If you cannot identify your weaknesses, you cannot strengthen them. Once awareness is established, refinement becomes possible. Refinement is the process of making small intentional adjustments based on what you have observed. It is not about drastic change or sudden transformation. It is about subtle shifts that align your actions more closely with your goals. Maybe it is improving how you manage your time, adjusting how you respond to stress, or becoming more focused during important tasks. These changes may seem minor in isolation, but when applied consistently, they begin to reshape your behavior. And as your behavior changes, your results begin to change as well. There is a level of patience required in this process that many people struggle to maintain. The results of reflection and refinement are not always immediate. Sometimes the improvements are so gradual that they are almost invisible in the moment. This can create doubt, the feeling that nothing is really changing, but what is happening beneath the surface is far more significant than it appears. You are building awareness, strengthening discipline, and creating alignment between your intentions and your actions. These are foundational shifts, and they take time to fully develop. Repetition is what brings everything together. Without repetition, reflection remains an idea, and refinement remains an intention. It is the act of consistently applying what you have learned that creates real progress. Each day becomes an opportunity to test your adjustments, to see what works and what does not. Some changes will be effective, others will need further refinement. This ongoing cycle keeps you engaged in your own growth. You are no longer drifting through your days, you are actively shaping them. Over time, this process creates a powerful sense of control. Not control over external circumstances, but control over your response to them. You begin to understand yourself at a deeper level, recognizing the triggers that lead to distraction, the habits that support your progress, and the behaviors that hold you back. This understanding allows you to make better decisions, not based on impulse, but based on awareness. There's also a level of accountability that emerges from this practice. When you reflect regularly, you cannot ignore your own patterns. You see them clearly, and that clarity makes it harder to justify actions that do not align with your goals. This is not about perfection. It is about responsibility. It is about taking ownership of your progress and recognizing that improvement is within your control. The cycle of reflect, refine, and repeat creates momentum that is both steady and sustainable. It does not rely on sudden breakthroughs or external validation. It is built on continuous improvement, on the commitment to get slightly better each day. And over time, those small improvements compound into meaningful change. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once felt unclear becomes structured, and what once felt out of reach becomes achievable, all through a process that is simple in concept but powerful in execution when practiced consistently over time.